Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Cyber Safe Elections webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that this land is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, the original people of this land. Treaty relationships and Indigenous stewardship endure here since time immemorial. We honor the deep history and continuing presence of Indigenous peoples across all regions of the country, and we commit to reconciliation as an ongoing journey. My name is Meredith Millman. I'm the head of marketing for products and platforms at GHD, and I'll be your moderator today. We are thrilled to have you here to explore cybersecurity in elections. This session is designed to be conversational. You're not going to see any slides, and responsive to the questions you submitted ahead of time and throughout the conversation. We'll touch on a range of topics from misinformation to infrastructure, and we'll leave room for Q&A as we go along. For your convenience, please do use the webinar chat or the Q&A feature for any technical issues or additional questions. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our panel of speakers. James Lind, Manager IT Security with the Regional Municipality of Halton. Shannon Devane, Municipal Risk Management with AMO LAS. Detective Constable Nate Matthew, Cybercrime Investigator with Halton Police. And Ben Barnes, Director of Cloud Operations with GHD. So thank you all for taking time to share your expertise with us today. And let's get this conversation started. So I'm going to start us off with one of the questions that came in from our attendees during registration. What are the most pressing cybersecurity threats facing election infrastructure today? So I'm going to open it up to the panel, and I think I will lob this one over to James and Ben to get us started.
Sure. Ben, why don't you start and then I'll just follow up?
Sure. It's a very open question. I think, right at the top of the list and has remained at the top of the list for some time is ransomware, and the evolving nature in terms of what it's, how it's come from years ago to where it is right now, specifically with the empowerment of AI in itself as well. That becomes, or at least is still seen as the number one area, or at least trend, right, that is evolving, and for many reasons, in the sense of utilizing social engineering to essentially infiltrate an organization and take advantage of the known norms, right? That's how people are being either influenced or tricked, in the sense, or at least collecting information that would make like an email appear to be normal, or at least coming from a conversation that was captured mid-flight. And so that becomes, I would say right now, still number one. I think coming down from that list, we look at traditional infrastructure in the sense of how it's being protected, and firewalls are no longer doing the job in terms of what they used to do. And again, the threats have evolved way beyond just a simple what we classify as the technical coffee filter, in the sense of being able to filter traffic and doing that. So moving that to more of a sophisticated application aware system, I think is really puts the organization in a place where it can combat the level of threats that are coming in. But I'll pause there because I have a few more. But James, I want to kind of get your take on those,
Sure.
those two and what you're seeing.
So Ben, completely agree. It's a rather open-ended question. And so to that point, I would suggest it depends on the organization you're talking about, because there is particular infrastructure that the federal government implements in the various provinces. I came from a municipality that was tasked with the local municipal elections. And with respect to our concern around the infrastructure, it primarily focused traditionally around denial of service, because come election night, the fact that you're polling, you're reporting on the polling stations, if that just pauses or stalls, there's a huge open-ended question around, well, what's happening with your elections systems and infrastructure. So that's one other area of concern, where it's like, make sure things move smoothly and it's a non-event.
Yeah, and that's that's a really good point because again, coming back into the sense of where we've seen AI come into the fold, that's where denial of service in itself intended to simply just disrupt the event. Often I'm asked a question as to why, what are they doing this for? What is the possible gain that they have? And it's often thought to be that the threat actors are in there for some kind of a monetary gain. And it's not. Often they're either it's either targeted with reputational damage being the intent, just simply maybe somebody
Mhm.
who unfortunately has an agenda, right? In the municipal space, at times, there are
Yeah.
possibly within the own mix of a constituent area that may
Yeah.
take issue with certain topics, and so
Yeah.
it is their way to get involved. So these all become, there's layers to it. You have your insider threat, you move out to your own community, and then of course you're moving out to more of international and nation states.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, denial of service is number one. I have a statistic here that even talks
Yeah.
about the fact that there's about a 53% increase year over year.
Yeah.
What we're looking at last year, and it's moved to and in the industry, there's always new words describing
Yeah.
an issue, and volumetric denial of service is the new trend now, and
Mhm.
that's really basically describing that somebody is interested in disrupting an election or disrupting some kind of a serious event, and where the attacks used to start gradually and then ramp up, they're actually starting at stage 10.
Yeah.
So their intent is to knock you out right away, not
Yeah.
cause this gradual stream. So that certainly is an area that let me
And
let
it's
me ask let me ask you this
sure.
question, James, from
Yep.
where from an overall in the sense of the election. I mean, you can kind of go in the order of the types of attacks that come in, but in terms of the areas that an organization, putting DDoS aside,
Mhm.
what other areas would you say would be the most important in protecting from an infrastructure standpoint?
Well, it depends on how the organization implemented their elections mechanism, for lack of a better word, because
Mhm.
ultimately what's at risk isn't necessarily monetary, in my opinion, but
Yeah.
it's more reputational. It's basically attacks on our
Yes.
democracy and an erosion of trust on that. And with respect to that would be if, let's say, an organization conducts sort of like online voting, then the integrity of the vote is a primary issue. So sort of
Yes.
like if you can't sort of audit the voting, you can't provide sort of assurances as to its integrity, then that throws everything open to question. So a follow on beyond just denial of service is integrity of the vote, subject to, hey, if you've done your voting online, that's a huge concern.
Mhm.
Whereas if it's traditional paper ballot, at least you can fall back to a recount mechanism.
Right.
And the likelihood of that issue being an issue is lessened by, ironically enough, paper ballots.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Can't take away paper ballots. I mean, that's certainly
Yeah.
if an all else fails, get back to the old ways of doing it. Yeah, very very interesting topic.
Hmm.
And just to top up for you, Ben,
Yep.
your opening statement was talking about ransomware as a primary vector that
Mhm.
is of concern. And I can tell you, the 5 years that I've spent as a cybercrime investigator, the frequency of ransom happening in Ontario and Canada has increased exponentially.
Yeah.
And we're having local businesses attacked um, daily, weekly. And and just for some insight, like back a number of years ago, we have a thing called dwell time, and dwell time is the amount of time that a bad actor is on the system that's been compromised without any knowledge, while they're sort of rooting around and figuring out what their attack vectors are going to be, etc. And a number of years ago, the dwell time was averaging about 6 to 8 months. Um, of the bad actor being inside those systems. But the trends that we're seeing now is that uh, it's more focused on quick hits. And so these
Mhm.
bad actors are now getting in there, and the dwell time is less than a week. Sometimes it's only in the hours and the days mechanism. So they're getting in there, they're doing their thing, and then they're encrypting the data, and then they're getting out. Conversely, there's a huge trend right now in the US, which has come across into Canada because there's no borders, and it deals more with an espionage scenario where these foreign state actors are coming in for the purposes of disruption and for espionage purposes. And their mechanisms are very different than what a traditional ransomware actors are. And in some cases, their dwell time could be in the years. So they'll establish a footprint and then they'll heartbeat out, every few months or every half a year or something to keep that connection alive. And during that process, there's a lot of collection of evidence and data. And in the States, we're seeing that, they're even able to intercept emails and voice calls to a certain degree. And so to kind of highlight the essence of the topic of espionage, typically companies are keeping log data for about 30 days. That seems to be the benchmark for where they're keeping that forensic data there for the purposes of investigating any threats after the fact. And so from a ransomware perspective, your 30-day logs would probably be appropriate. But if we're thinking about critical infrastructure, et cetera, there might want to be a shift when you're looking at future budgets, et cetera, to extend your cold storage of your log data to extend past what normal expectancies are. And I was part of a tabletop exercise just recently with one of our municipalities, and they said that they have active hot storage for 9 months on their log data, and then they keep 3 months additional in cold storage. So they have 12 months, but that's not typical to what it is that I'm seeing on a frontline basis when it comes to these businesses. And so anyway, I would just like to prepare some awareness that if we are looking at critical infrastructure, et cetera, that we might want to extend that cold storage for as long as financially as possible.
That's a great point, Nate, because if you could take a look at PCI, the requirements for retention of security logs is essentially 1 year's, basically 3 months on hot storage and 9 months on cold. With respect to the infrastructure and the ability to sort of like address or mitigate that, I worked for a municipality when we were doing elections where we literally built an air-gapped network. So basically the election results, when the polling stations sort of reported in, somebody took a USB key up one floor, and then we published that out to the web. It was basically literally sneaker net. So maybe you have to get to that point where it's like air-gapped the entire environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly. Oh, go ahead, Nate.
I just wanted to say as a quick top up too, so typically we would see our breach attack points coming in as some sort of like either 0-day or software-based exploit. But in the cases now, I don't know if there's a trend, but we're seeing exploits happening at the hardware level. And so case in point, the one that I'm specifically talking about was an unpatched Cisco router, where it was the CPU itself that had been compromised. And in that case there, if we're looking at remediation happening from an IT department, they may not be looking in the right place when they're looking for their IOCs. And in the event of, say, an edge router that is an unpatched Cisco router, even if they were to reset the device and reset all the credentials, et cetera, and basically rebuild it from the ground up, if that persistence is inside the hardware side, it doesn't go away. And so our patch maintenance needs to ensure that this is happening on an ongoing basis, and that even on like edge routers that are outside of your normal infrastructure, they may be sort of VPNing into whatever your domain is, et cetera. They can't be forgotten about when it comes to your asset management. And in this case here, unless you're aware that these 0-day exploits, et cetera, are hitting on the hardware level as opposed to the software level, you could continue to have persistence of that bad actor.
Absolutely. It's a great segue into vulnerability management, but I'll pause, bring Meredith back in here because I know there's a list of other questions that we want to make sure that we get to. But I'll pass it back to you, Meredith.
Awesome. Thank you. You guys hit on a couple of topics already that are questions. I'm like,
yes.
They're leading. Do I take them? Okay. So let's jump on the one in terms of the topic of trust. So we had several people asking around misinformation, right? So can we talk about how municipalities can prepare for or respond to misinformation campaigns during elections?
Well, I guess I'll go first in terms of I think that's also incumbent upon municipalities to educate the voters in terms of um, chances are if you see something that sort of like stokes emotions, chances are if you see terms like always or everyone, you know, basically pejorative terms that sort of like try to leverage or move you emotionally, one should think critically about that. Like, what are they trying to achieve, right? In terms of like, are you trying to basically elicit my emotions to sort of think a certain way, vote a certain way? However, I think it is not necessarily municipalities, although other levels of government, I do see sort of advisories around misinformation that's coming out, which is great. But I think it's a user education and critical thinking on it's on the voters to some degree.
So, Margaret, Shannon, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree, but I think it's part of that broader education campaign. I think it's really important that every single voter knows exactly what they can expect from the municipality, what they're going to receive, what it will look like, the method of that communication. And we're starting to see that with other private sector companies. You know, we will never ask you for this.
Yes.
We will never call you and ask you for this. We will never. So some kind of communication plan as you lead into the election about what exactly the voter can expect, and that education around what their election day will look like, and even their pre-voting stations as well, what that whole process is going to look like in October of 2026.
Yeah, definitely underscore that because it's controlling the narrative, right? And making sure that it's known that it's coming for you. If I can add to it, I would say that, one that probably doesn't get a lot of attention is working with local media or your social media platforms and sort of understanding what their process is for reporting, or at least having an expedited method to be able to take down misinformation, and be able to process that, because that's what spiders out of control, right? In the sense of whether they're putting on Facebook, Instagram, the social media of the day, but also maintaining relationships with those, whether it's whether it's been established one like a Facebook or a fly by night one. I think that's important to at least help you control. You're not going to get it all, but I think having that in your arsenal and at least your processes is incredibly important to help you at least control the messaging that's out there.
Ben, great point that you made. And this is where I think a lot of municipalities are moving up that maturity curve with respect to the various communications team within the municipalities.
Yes.
I'll give you an example. My current municipality's comms teams, they monitor the social media. They make sure it's a brand protection mechanism. In fact, we not to expose the details, we a while back had Nate sort of run down why was this certain channel set up on behalf of Halton Region, and it wasn't basically us. So yeah, brand protection's kind of paramount.
Yeah, and James, that's into about highlighting where you can get trusted information from. Where this is where we post this information. This is information that's officially coming from the municipality, so that they understand, well, this looks a little bit off, or why would they post on this platform, or why. So if people understand, this is how my municipality communicates with me, which municipal communication people have a big job. It's tough to reach people in this day and age across so many platforms. But I think starting, and that's work that should start now. We're less than 365 days out from this election. That's work that should absolutely start now.
Well, that was the question I was going to ask you, Shannon, in the sense of what is that timing? Because it's everybody gets caught in the day to day, and it's not going to be something that, you'll have a certain level of ramp up to be able to do on a regular basis. But leading up to the election, what would you say is sort of the graduated timeline to get that level of education out there?
That's a great question. I would definitely be starting that now if there's dedicated websites, getting those, websites names out and getting people interacting with those sites again so they become that trusted source of information. And then leading up into October 2026. I would say by late spring you'd really want to be focusing those targeted campaigns to your constituents.
I would suggest, Ben, about a year prior to elections. And I worked for a municipality that used to, in the past, build their own elections app. So looking at that, it was like more than a year, in fact, 2 years out. But that's the whole point around it is a complicated, depending on the size of the municipality. But I worked for one where we ended up having like several hundred polling stations, right? With the elections laptops doing voter strike-offs. It was 1,000 laptops, right? So yeah, this is definitely a major project, and if you started less than a year, I think you're going to run into problems.
Which, of course, is why we're here today, right?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Nate, did you want to jump in on that?
That's okay. I just wanted to do a quick top up on Shannon and James's point, where we're talking about disruption campaigns and misinformation, and it's ironic that I'm currently on a conference right now that is law enforcement focused, and the initial keynote speakers today were dealing with fake videos, like deepfake videos, and there's been a 3,500% increase in deepfake videos in 2024 over the previous year, and we can all attest that we see deepfake videos now on every platform, and the majority of which seem to be either politically based and or crypto fraud based, and so and it also does the increase in things like robocalling for the sole purpose of trying to disrupt political campaigns and voting. So the takeaways are going to be that we should challenge what it is that we see out there, and we need to corroborate, at least like from a personal perspective, you need to be able to corroborate the truth through different mediums. And if you see something that it looks too good to be true, or is trying to create that emotional context like James was talking about, you just might want to question it, and then just try to find additional answers to corroborate what you think the true information is, as opposed to what the false information is that's being relayed to you.
It's regarding deepfakes, and this is where I think the unfortunate situation is there is sort of like a business use case that the vendors have to sort of leverage deepfake-like technologies. We all see you have a video generated where you yourself are speaking another language. That's a little bit of a deepfake sort of technology. And there's I guess, a legitimate use case for that. But at the same time, I see the vendors standing up things like C2PA for content provenance and authenticity. And so I think our various vendors like Microsoft, they're sort of schizophrenic with respect to developing that kind of technology and at the same time protecting us against it. Who knows where it plays out?
Awesome. Thank you. So we talked about integrity of the vote. James, you mentioned laptops. You know I'm going to bring this topic up. I know it's complex, so we won't necessarily, well, I'll leave it to the professionals, so you guys to go as deep as you want, but we had lots of people asking to talk about internet voting. So could we touch on, what municipalities should be considering at a high level, especially around risk and readiness when it comes to internet voting?
Ooh, that's
I know it's a big one. It's a big topic, and I know a lot. It's like, no, just don't do it. But
you know my opinion, because there is possibilities around sort of a zero, not zero trust, zero knowledge approach around voting, because the problem with internet voting is, one, we have to preserve the anonymity of the voter. But at the same time, we have to provide assurances that the vote cast by that voter was for the intended candidate. And how do you square that requirement of, well, you have to be anonymous, but you have to provide information to allow them to verify, and this is where that can of worms opens up, and I don't see traditional platforms until they implement things like sort of this zero knowledge approach that we're not there yet. Over to
I
you.
agree.
Yeah.
I agree with that. And I mean, I think the other factor as well is at third party, right? Having that sort of trust chain in the sense of, what service are you using and, the normal due diligence that you would go through to do that, but understanding that at some point you're only as good as your weak points. I think that becomes a level of exposure. We've seen a number of that happen, with various vendors in the sense of having, potentially a breach down the line. Perhaps maybe it's one of their trusted partners having that in place. So for elections, I agree with you, James. It becomes, are we there yet? I don't. I certainly can say that we're not. I think there are ways to get there. It's just unfortunately that ecosystem that we need to have a level of just not just the persons that are running the elections and trusting the technology, but you also have the constituents in themselves, right? In the sense of how are you going to validate this? How do you know that none of this was manipulated? Nobody wants a freedom of information request to say, please prove to me end to end, byte by byte,
Yeah.
none of this was
And
manipulated.
that's right on, you're bang on, Ben, because even if you basically reach out to the various sort of vendors that do voting applications like the Dominions and so on,
Yes.
you're still gonna you can ask for an SBOM, a software bill of materials. You could vet the whatever code if they allow that. But the problem is, how do you explain that to the average voter? And because they're going to go, no, no, no. And we saw that, right? Baseless accusations against the likes of Dominion by sort of news organizations.
Yes.
And that's done. You can't disprove it, even though you technically can. But whether or not the average person understands that, that's the problem, right?
The question came in while you guys were talking about this. And so just to your point, that average, like making sure everybody understands. So we have a question about, can you define the zero knowledge approach?
Oh, yeah. So basically, zero knowledge is a mechanism whereby you can sort of prove that you have the ability to sort of like prove that you know what the result is without disclosing the actual result. So I'll give you an example, and you can look this up. ING Bank implemented a privacy protection measure called zero knowledge range proof. And what it does is the mortgage brokers actually take a look at a mortgage applicant's income. They don't directly look at it. They actually use that zero knowledge range proof to verify, yes, their income is within this range without disclosing the actual dollar amount. And so that's a privacy protection measure. And so if we leverage something like that in terms of online voting, maybe that's a possible mechanism, right?
Okay. We will move off the controversial topic of internet voting. So another question that came up was really about infrastructure independence. And I think James and Ben, you both have already sort of touched on this, but we'll just dive into it a little bit more here if you could. So the question was, what are some infrastructure components that municipalities should protect and manage independently from their corporate technology stack?
Okay. Well, like I said, I worked at a municipality where we used to build our own elections app. Specifically, it was around the voter strike off and basically the voters list information that's highly sensitive. There's a lot of PII there. And so we actually built a actual air-gapped environment. And the only way to transfer that out to internet-facing web server to publish the voting result was literally to sneaker net the data in a USB key to our data center. So it got to that point where it's like, if you really want to actually sort of keep these critical sort of systems or services, you literally air gap it. It's single use, single purpose. There's no email on that voter infrastructure. It's just dedicated to voting and it's air gapped.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, that's essentially the model, to really keep and everything related. But to your other part of your question, Meredith, I think in talking about the other components, I would, I know this is a broad stroke, but it's almost like all of the above when you're starting to look at anything related to the election, right? So your voter roll database as an example, your registration system, and having that, and in between a level of verification, obviously that's happening, but all those elements have to be separated from your corporate network, right? And by doing that, you're essentially resetting the threat level or the threat access to that is known, right? So today, your corporate networks, as a constable was alluding to, there are various elements where threat actors have either maybe gotten in or maybe they're just laying low and just sort of waiting for an event. And an election certainly is a key event to watch for. But by having that critical information that they're seeking away from your corporate, I think is certainly paramount to your success, right? And in terms of being able to at least minimize that, and then using the air gap method as I think is key. But James, I'll flip one question to you in the sense
Sure.
of the integrity of a chain of custody, I guess. So the person taking that USB stick with that data, they're moving from point A to point B, right? And
Yep.
talking about even looking at things from an insider threat perspective,
hmm
what additional controls are put on that can be put on that, particularly, let's say, with a device to verify it, to ensure again the integrity is completely end to end, even in an air gap situation.
Sure. So as an example, and this well, actually also applied to our scanning voter ballot scanning machines. Each of those USB keys had serial numbers. So the idea around sort of like sticking these keys into the various devices, they are actually tracked. That's one aspect. I don't know if you can practically, because we didn't do that, implement sort of like a separation of duties, because it is basically just one individual just sneaker netting it up into the data center one floor above. Beyond that, there's mechanisms around, there's sorry, not voter, there's video recording of basically the elections quote data center, for lack of a better word, and also the data center and the hallways that the individual traverses. So at the very least, at least there is surveillance.
Right. Yeah, good point. Good point.
Okay. We have, I'm going to flip to one of the questions that's come in while you're chatting. So given the recent alters and notifications from CCS and RCMP, are municipalities safeguarding or protecting against nation state attacks on municipal elections?
That's a great point, and I think it depends, because the problem using municipalities as a broad stroke, I think, is sort of like inaccurate, because you have the likes of City of Toronto, which in terms of resourcing and the ability to defend themselves, they're almost at a provincial level. Whereas if you go to Wasaga Beach, I don't know what their IT staff is, but maybe it's just two individuals. So yeah, you're sort of like looking at a municipality in monolith, whereas I think there's a poverty line, for lack of a better word, in terms of cybersecurity poverty line, where quite a few municipalities, and that was the point that the AMO made with respect to Bill 194, where it's like you're asking for these requirements, but a lot of municipalities are on the smaller side. They may not be able to do this. So.
James, would you consider as a, because I know this has even itself been controversial in itself in the sense of enforcing, just as a protection mechanism, geofencing. What would you say the pros and cons of that would be for a municipality?
I think that's a nice to have, and in fact, it would help a lot, because short of internet voting, I think geofencing is practical, because in terms of elections, especially municipal elections, yeah, it's kind of makes sense. I mean, you're in the area, you're a resident in the municipality, right? So that's a great approach.
Yeah.
The other issue too potentially is that, and James can attest, is that when you're taking a look at something like a region, that region may not be aligned with all of their different communications and infrastructure policies, etc. So if you're looking at a regional voting platform, so in Halton, we've got like 4 municipalities. We have Georgetown, Acton, Burlington, and Oakville. And if there isn't alignment in there and there's no communication platform between each of the different parties, then your attack surface can increase significantly. And so at the very least, I would say that, create a working group regionally with all of your partners just to be able to discuss these issues and figure out if there is a way for any infrastructure alignment and or policy alignment, MOUs, etc., to be able to piggyback off each other in case one gets hurt and you need to borrow somebody else's bandwidth, etc. Because we have to be right 100% of the time. For defense, but they only need to be right 1% of the time, and it's just a constantly uphill fighting battle.
Nate, great point, and to pivot off that point, I think that's where we have to go, because there's no way that the smaller municipalities are resourced enough, and if they combine efforts. And this is where it's probably insightful in terms of maybe they should get together as a group, because procuring off-the-shelf elections systems, maybe sort of banding together, buying as one sort of coordinated body gives you sort of pricing breaks. And that would also leverage the fact that, okay, you're banded as a group and you're asking for these common security requirements. And whatever sort of requests to the vendors, if it's coming from a group of municipalities, it carries a lot more weight than just an individual municipality. So great points.
All right, we mentioned AMO, so this one lines right up to Shannon. So we also, of course, had lots of interest in cybersecurity insurance and the lessons from recent incidents, including the Hamilton attack, which was specifically called out. So what should municipalities be thinking about in terms of coverage and response planning?
So I would say, first and foremost, that there's risk in any method that you choose for carrying out an election. So you're going to have risks. What you need to do is you sit down and you need to categorize those risks. What are you aware of? What can you mitigate, and how can you mitigate it? So the most traditional method we have for mitigating risk is transferring it to an insurer. So you're going to buy insurance to help cover off these risks. In the cyber insurance world, we are seeing it evolving quickly. We are starting to see a little bit of, I hesitate to use the word, but a stabilization in it. So during the pandemic, like 2020, 2021, cyber insurers' loss ratios sat in and around between 400 and 500%. And what that means is for every dollar that they were bringing in premium, they were spending $4 to $5 in claims. So that's completely unsustainable. Insurers are for-profit entities, so that's completely unsustainable. We're seeing those numbers come down. Those loss ratios are in that profitable area. And why is that? Largely because premiums have gone up, deductibles have gone up, and the coverage has changed. So what's critically important as you're sitting down and getting ready for this election is to understand, what insurance do you have in place? Do you have cyber insurance? Does your municipality have cyber insurance? The first question. Second question, what does that coverage look like? And then there are certain reporting requirements, not just for cyber insurance, but for other insurance as well. But you're going to need to report if you're bringing on an additional 1,000 laptops. That needs to be reported. That's equipment that's going on to your insurance policy, typically a property insurance policy. If you're bringing on additional vehicles, additional human resources, any additional equipment, that needs to be reported to your insurer. But what's critical there, especially if you're doing internet voting, is understanding what cyber insurance you have in place and understanding the cyber insurance requirements that you have requested of your vendors. So any vendor that's touching the election, what is their cyber insurance coverage, and what does their coverage look like? And you will find that in the contract. And I mean, that goes for any contract, whether it's cyber or not. You want to understand what insurance is in place and how it will respond. For example, if you're using a school and you've entered into an agreement with that Board of Education, what are the insurance requirements? From the cyber perspective, I'd say also critically important is to have an incident response plan. So you likely have an emergency response plan for your municipality overall. You need to have an incident response plan as part of that cyber insurance policy. Your cyber insurer will also likely, again, you have to look into it, but will likely have an incident response portion. So you need to understand how that's going to work. And I would say, I can't stress enough, and I think my panelists, I'm going to go out on a limb and say they would agree with me on this. You have to test it before next October. You're going to have to sit down and you're going to have to test that. If you're not doing internet voting, you have to sit down and you have to run an emergency scenario that happens during advanced polling. And even, I'm Sunshine Shannon, that's what they call me at work. So I'm like, what if there's a flood next October on your election day? Now, under the Elections Act, the clerk does have the ability to declare an emergency. You need to understand what that's going to look like and what your plan is.
So great point. Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, no, I think fantastic, Sharon. And I was going to follow that up with the insurance programs that are out there. Understand that some companies will actually include incentives, or these have technology capability tied to help organizations that may not be equipped. What are you seeing with that in the sense of does that help your actual your fee that you're paying for insurance, or is that something that you're better off doing as a third party versus taking what the insurance includes?
It's a great question. The best thing to do is sit down and see what's included, what that policy comes with, and how they can assist. And that comes from both your cyber insurer and your insurance provider. So that could be a broker. See what kind of services they're offering. Right now, we're still seeing this. These are things you have to have to meet the threshold of being insurable. Right. So we're not seeing as much like for your home insurance, if you put this alarm on here, it's 10% off.
Right? Cost, yeah.
Right. We're not seeing that right now. I'm not seeing that right now in the cyber world. It's more, this is what you have to have in place. And if you don't have it and a claim happens, your claim could be denied. So that means the insurance is not going to pay out because there was a breach there and there was an exclusion in the policy and you hit that exclusion. So the insurance will no longer respond. So really it's about right now for municipalities, it's about presenting themselves as a good risk. Like we are identifying the risks and we're mitigating them as best we can. And if you need help with that, and you have cyber insurance currently, they may be able to assist you, or your insurance provider will be able to assist you. And there's lots of good programs out there.
Now, Shannon, the have-to-haves have evolved significantly over the last 5 years.
Yes,
and I think at the beginning the cyber requirements were very little because there was very little knowledge about that space, and then as you said, what the pitfalls were, the 400%. Could you just briefly talk about some of the have-to-haves now on a general basis, and like what are the insurance companies expecting from both an infrastructure perspective and like an IR perspective, etc.? What are you seeing?
That's a great question. And first and foremost, is MFA, the multi-factor authentication. That has to be on 100% of the time in every single capacity. They want to see that across the board. In terms of what other have-to-haves you need, I can tell you when I worked for a municipality and I got the cyber insurance in, I could fill in the first maybe page and a half. I could go through with the information I had. When I left 5 years later, I could fill out the name of the municipality, and then I had to hand it over to my IT people. I was like, I don't even know what they are. So they've gotten very in-depth with it. And each carrier has different requirements, but across the board, we're seeing MFA as you have to have that to get insurance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I'm also seeing, with respect to a lot of these questions from the insurers, also sort of requirements around, well, what is your vulnerability management? What's the patch cadence on your systems? How are you identifying and triaging that? The other consideration with respect to cyber insurance, and you made that great point, Shannon, rehearse that because you don't want to at the point where you call up the breach coach that your insurer sort of shortlisted and you selected one of them. Your breach coach may be completely misaligned with your incident response plan. So get that sort of shaken out.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's, you don't want to be meeting somebody on your very worst day, right? Like I would rather meet that reach coach. And
Yeah.
you can bring your risk people in. If you have a risk and insurance person in your municipality, bring them in right now. If they're not already in, bring them in like tomorrow morning, set a meeting with them, bring them in, and they'll be able to help like connect those dots so that you're getting a chance to meet everybody before you're in an incredibly stressful, high pressure, like it I can't stress it enough how important it would be to just even know what, like I have to pick up the phone, I have to call a number, who am I calling? To know who you're calling goes a long way, and to understand that incident response plan and who is told what and what everybody's roles are in the incident response plan, I think are critically important, that everybody understands what the role they have, because it's not just, oh, hey, IT, we've had a cyber incident and everybody's going to walk away.
Yeah.
Every single senior leader has a role, every elected official has a role. And if it happens, knock on all of the wood around my house, during an election, if you have some kind of cyber incidents, of course, they're going to have to be very much in the fold of that response.
I do want to jump into IRPs just in a second because, but we did have a question that came in and specifically it was related to insurance. So we're seeing, the question is, we are seeing premiums reduced with appropriate controls, e.g. MFA, lower Azure security score, etc. Do regional bodies have the ability to influence insurance carriers?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, no, it's terrible with the terrible answer. Yes and no. I mean, if it depends on who your carrier is, if it's a, you know, somebody out of Lloyd's of London that is a global carrier, I mean, the amount of risk that they take on and what they're managing is massive. And, you know, can one region, you know, alter that? No. But if we all work collectively together and start setting standards, and to that point, that brings all 444 municipalities up together. As you do, you have your, you know, your larger cities that have these massive IT departments, and then you have smaller communities. What we're striving for at AMO LAS is to really fight for having everybody brought up together. But really, if you're looking for influence, the important thing there is that communication. So it's that partnership with your insurance provider. So whether that be a broker or the insurer directly, and that you're having those meetings and you're having discussions, not just around renewal and not just when the premium goes up or something, you know, less pleasant has happened, but, you know, in your day to day, you're working with them as a partner. That insurer is your partner and they're helping you manage the risk. So it's having those open conversations around what the best way is, what are best practices, how do we best manage this risk, and how do we work together to do that?
Thank you, Shan. And you started talking about running your IRP. Detective Constable Nate mentioned tabletop exercises. So just kind of curious in terms of coming into the last part of the session today is, you know, how often should municipalities be conducting penetration tests and updating their incident response plans? What does a healthy cadence look like, especially leading into the elections?
But maybe I could just start off by saying that your IR plan needs to be intact and it needs to be practiced more than once before the day of the event. And I've now gone through a number of tabletop exercises with partners, and it does get easier over time with the repetition of this really high stress scenario. And we see even in training that people are easy to go redline when massive amounts of decisions, critical decision points need to be made, even in a simulation, because a lot of people are risk adverse. They don't really understand the space. They don't have a coordinated strategy. But by doing it over and over and over again, you get these lessons learned, and then it's still not ideal, but it does get easier to make certain decision points because collectively you've come together and you've talked about, well, what if we went down this rabbit hole, or what if we did this, or what if we decided to pay or didn't decide to pay. Like these, and your communication strategy is key too, because if you want somebody to be able to talk about what's happening, they're not going to be able to spitball that at the time. You need to have a rehearsed communications plan with a set amount of frequency that talks about the talking points that you want to address, depending on whatever this scenario is. So my recommendation would be to get that conversation started. If you don't have an IR plan, you should probably look to get one soonest, but that on its own is a huge feat, which we won't talk about today, but it is an enormous task to get one and then get one that's signed off. And then make sure you bring all of your partners into all your stakeholders in together, and you can all discuss it, which includes things like your communication team, your legal team, your IT team, etc. And just as a plug for the police really need to be at the table, or at least from an observation perspective, so we can give you some insight to what we're seeing externally, and then how we can help you. And I was going to segment this off to the very end of the seminar, but just a quick little segue for us. The police don't want to be seen as an adversary with these types of scenarios. We really want to create partnerships within our municipalities where we can be a support mechanism. And that doesn't mean that we're going to come in there, we're going to be hands on keyboard. That isn't our role, subject to maybe us grabbing some forensic data that's encapsulated within whatever your 0-day machine would be that got initially affected, and or your servers. But we can bring a lot to the table, and we're not going to help you necessarily with decision points, but we have national and international partners where we all collectively talk about. And if I know that you have a certain ransomware, et cetera, on your machine, I can reach out to our international partners, and Italy may have a decryption key. But we wouldn't know that unless we were invited to the table either beforehand or at the point of the incident. And the number one issue that the police are facing when we want to collaborate and work with you as a support mechanism is once the firm or the municipality hires a breach coach, typically those companies also have a legal section, and that legal section ends up taking over, and they invoke what's something that's called client privilege. And once they invoke client privilege, it basically means that anybody that's not in the nest of what's happening gets excluded, which includes the police. And I can tell you that we want to help, and we want to be seen as a partner and not as an adversary. So please just consider using us. Reach out to whoever your local cybercrime investigator is. And if you don't have one because your municipality doesn't support it, and let's not, the police in general are still relatively at the infancy. We're on the way of getting better, but not all police services have this capacity. But the OPP does, and the Toronto Police does, and the RCMP do, and we have a lot of support mechanisms on a bigger level. So in case your policing jurisdiction, your POJ doesn't have that support, you can feel free to reach out to the OPP and get assistance. So anyway, that's kind of my my little blurb there for the police is your friend and not your enemy, and the frequency of your incident response needs to be practiced, as many times as possible before the actual day of the event.
Nate, great point. So just to build off of your points, I completely agree. And I think this is where, if you're the security leader for your organization, you have to have these conversations with the emergency management office. If you're Ontario municipality, you have to have conversations with your senior leadership with respect to, well, do we go down that road of, okay, legal throws up a barrier, or are we more proactive in terms of getting law enforcement involved? The situation with respect to, you have to determine, and this is where that dress rehearsal is kind of paramount. You have to put senior leadership in terms of, well, what is the approach for the organization? Are you comfortable with this? Because I can understand where legal's coming from around, basically they're protecting the organization from potential class actions, but at the same time, what does that buy you? Because you don't have insight in terms of lessons learned, how they got in, and so on necessarily. Whereas if you're more open in that nature, right, that would help. In a way, we're kind of missing legislative requirements around, and I've invoked the American National Transportation Safety Board, whereas the part of their proviso is their findings of their investigations cannot be used in legal proceedings. That's, I think, helpful, because if you're trying your best as an organization, you're not going to get basically whacked over the head for, coming up short.
Yeah.
The other situation around frequency, as often as possible, and I cite first responders where you typically hear, oh, and then the training takes over. Because in these high duress events where emotions could override, if your training becomes muscle memory, that's a lot more effective.
No, great point. In tying it maybe back to the to frequency, particularly around pen test as an example. This is one area that I think it's about the scope of the pen test, and so pen testing, just like your applications or your website, is not enough. And I think that part of the plan needs to be pen testing your entire infrastructure, and you kind of look at it both from an external and from an internal standpoint, whether you do that together or separate. Maybe hire two different companies to kind of give you comparative results between them. But definitely minimum, I'd say a year. A year is when you're doing that level of, because what comes out of that, there's remediation, there's always going to be something to fix and go through, and you need that time to do that. But injected in between there is your vulnerability management program, and that is what keeps you balanced during the course of your year until your pen test comes in. So you're constantly scanning your environment. Applications are coming in, whether updates, whether different libraries are coming in. So having that program that is that has that rigor built in it to be able to go to the point where you're scanning on a regular basis, just really unearthing anything that's out of date or something that maybe somebody introduced some new application or file into the environment, because those are unfortunately the weak points that get generated that then opens the door for an attack. So pen test once a year, vulnerability management is an ongoing, I would say daily to at least a very minimum monthly, that you are scanning and looking at the results and then remediating those items that come up.
Yeah, and if I can throw in there, especially right before your cyber insurance, if you have a renewal coming up, best to do it before your potential insurers do it, because they will do that before they place coverage as well.
Yeah, great point.
Awesome, thank you. So, knowing we're coming to the top of the hour, wanting to be respectful of everybody's time, a lot of what we've heard today is about the topic of trust, integrity of the vote, right? Getting your trusted sources of information up now as the municipality. Like, don't wait. Get your citizens knowing who to go to, where the true information is coming from. For smaller municipalities, if you can get together and work through some things, do so. And run and get those IRP plans, get those IRs ready and known. So is there any other last thoughts from anybody else?
I guess in order to address this issue in its entirety, I think we have to involve legislators, because as I said before, if they can level set the legal legislation so that we are sort of positioned for success. And that's the one issue around, there's a standard out there called a reasonable standard of care that's circulating around. I think that approach around, hey, if the organization's doing their due diligence and it's a reasonable effort, yeah, I think that would be helpful in terms of, well, that way organizations don't hide behind sort of a legal privilege, and we can see, well, what works out there, what attack works, what doesn't, because I suspect a lot of valuable data is hiding behind a lot of legal privilege walls. All of these breaches, you don't hear the specific details.
Yeah, all set.
So there, we've had a couple questions coming in around the recording. The recording will be sent out to everybody who has registered and attended. And if there are any questions, I've seen a couple coming in at the end that we didn't get a chance to get to. We will also get those answered and send them out as part of the communications. So I do want to say thank you, Shannon, James, Nate, and Ben, and everyone else who joined us today. We do hope that you found the session practical, gave you some ideas on how to strengthen your election infrastructure. And as I said, we will be sending out some follow-up resources, as well as a copy of the recording. And if anybody wants to continue the conversation, please do reach out. We do have experts and folks around that can help you. So thank you again, and stay safe.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.